Thanks for the time. Cattles and Ramie, Sactown Sports here on a Wednesday. I want to ask you about Trey Lance. Your thoughts on Trey as a QB1 this year?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of discussion. There's a lot of feelings of boom or bust with Trey Lance. But I go back again, take people back 10 years to Robert Griffin III and what a Shanahan offense can do with the running quarterback. We know Robert Griffin III was a pretty elite fantasy quarterback for a little while, his rookie year, I would say, when he was healthy and putting up the numbers. And he did a lot through the running. We know that is going to be a big part of what Trey Lance does. But the other carryover, believe it or not, is Trent Williams is still his left tackle at this point in the Shanahan offense. So you have great offensive line, very good weapons overall. They're starting to look deeper here with Juwan Jennings and Danny Gray behind George Kittle and Brandon Ayuk and Deebo Samuel. So loaded with weapons. You have a good running game, good offensive line. There's just a high ceiling here for Trey Lance. So it's exciting to see that. I think they're going to let him loose, and they're pretty confident in what he can do. And that's what you have to look at, the system and the support with these young quarterbacks. And Trey Lance, you look at what Justin Fields has or Trevor Lawrence or Zach Wilson, he's got it made here in relation to those guys.
You brought up George Kittle. We were just talking before you came on, Vinny, about reports that the chemistry hasn't quite been there or hasn't been there yet between Trey Lance and George Kittle. When you're a fantasy football expert, is that on your radar, and how much stock do you put in that over the course of a training camp and a guy who's at the top of his position group when you're talking about a George Kittle?
Well, I think you definitely have to pay attention to chemistry. You know, we have it with Patrick Mahomes and Travis Kelce and Lamar Jackson and Mark Andrews. So we know there was that establishment there between him and Jimmy Garoppolo. So you can concern yourself with it a little bit. I think it's hard in that tier behind Kelce, Andrews, and Kyle Pitts that you have Darren Waller and George Kittle there. They have a couple red flags, injury related on both fronts. Derek Carr has now Devontae Adams as his number one with Hunter Renfrow behind him. So a little bit of concerning. Similar situations where you have two other receivers who can get the quarterback's attention maybe a little bit more. So it is a little concerning. Kittle is high risk, high reward because he plays like a freight train, and that's always going to put him in the line of injuries. And this chemistry thing is a little concerning, but if you get George Kittle, I think it's a given now. You have to have a pretty good backup tight end.
Vinnie Iyer with us from Sporting News, talking fantasy football, getting you ready for your drafts as we get closer to the season. Vinny, my last question regarding the Niners has to do with Deebo. Where does Deebo Samuel stack in your wide receiver rankings? And also, how much do you factor in his rushing touches?
Yeah, this might be a little bit different this year because Trey Lance is going to steal some of that rushing action. We know, and some touchdowns are going to come that way. And Elijah Mitchell, if he stays healthy and is out there, he's going to score quite a bit. And then we know they're going to work in other backs. I just don't think they want to put too much on him and wear him down because it happened with an older player there in Cordarrelle Patterson last year. It's a great idea to think, okay, this hybrid player can dominate. But I would say a lot less rushing work. He actually could see increased receiving work overall, and that could take away from Kittle in relation to that. So I love Deebo. I think he's still a top 10 wide receiver. And there's a lot of guys that I consider right in that range, CeeDee Lamb and Mike Evans and others, but he's right up there with them as a pretty solid wide receiver one in a 12-team league.
Outside of San Francisco, as folks, including myself, get ready for their draft this Sunday, what would you do with the 8th pick? No. Who's a guy that a lot of people are talking about is like a top pick and you just don't see it, Vinny, where you might say stay away?
Yeah, to me, it's circle, put a red cross, put a red flag right next to his name, Christian McCaffrey. I'm just not buying it. I'm not falling into this trap again like it's happened before. I was recovered from it last year on one of my teams, but I can't do it. I mean, part of it is the personal, but it's also he hasn't been healthy in 3 years. And these are not injuries that just go away. He's had a heavy workload going back to his Stanford days. He was used in every capacity. He was used in a return game. He played there a lot. And the touches were just poured on him in Carolina. They're planning to dump on a heavy workload again. I don't think he's built to handle that anymore, and that's my concern. I think they'll try to spell him a little bit with Donta Foreman and Chuba Hubbard to help him stay healthy, but I'm still not going there. I think you could go safer. I think you could just look at Najee Harris, or you could look at pivoting to wide receiver, Justin Jefferson or Cooper Kupp, or just so many different options that are safer picks, I think, in the first round.
Feel the same way about Saquon Barkley?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's some better vibes with Saquon right now with the Giants and some of the things they're looking at, but you don't know what you're going to get from that offense. I mean, the offensive line looked good at times in the preseason, but I think it's a bit up and down, work in progress. Daniel Jones, where are you going to get there? I just don't want to attach myself to these questionable offenses with some big concerns there at quarterback or in line, and I think the Giants and Panthers kind of fall into that as well on top of the injury risk.
Who's your top quarterback right now? And is it worth it to go for a quarterback early in the draft, or is the position deep enough that you can wait to go later?
Well, I think Josh Allen is still my top quarterback just because the combination of the explosive offense, they're going to throw the ball as much as they can, and, he's going to run and get his points that way as well. So it's a unique combination. I do think Justin Herbert could threaten him to be the top scorer here. I think I'm still going to look beyond some of the middle tier guys. So I think Jalen Hurts has some upside there that you look at, but that Kyler Murray, Joe Burrow, Dak Prescott, that kind of tier, I don't want to necessarily invest there. So I'm either going for an Allen or Herbert or Mahomes early, maybe even extend that to Lamar Jackson. But otherwise, you look at the values, those are coming up on the board. We mentioned Trey Lance, Tom Brady's out there, Matthew Stafford, Aaron Rodgers. I think you can even extend to Derek Carr and Kirk Cousins having a lot of upside there as QB1s where you're not going to have that big of a drop-off once you get later into the quarterbacks.
Vinnie Iyer from the Sporting News with us talking fantasy football. All right, Vinnie, your top 5 running backs.
Well, right now, my number one is Jonathan Taylor. Just don't think about it. The number one pick, feel good about it. I love Najee Harris at number 2. I just like that spot. He's young. He's got durability, the volume. I think that Steelers offense is going to surprise some people. Hopefully it's Kenny Pickett in there. I actually feel better about it there with the rookie versus Mitchell Trubisky. And then I think you could go many different ways with the next quarterback. I still think Derrick Henry, if he's healthy, he's a freakish guy that I think could have Adrian Peterson-like resolve and coming back from injury and putting up those numbers. So I do like him. I think one guy that people are sleeping on that I could see finishing in the top half of RBs is Aaron Jones. I just look at where the Packers offense is. When Devontae Adams missed games for the Packers, Aaron Jones ate up a lot of work in the receiving game. He's going to score touchdowns. So you could see a repeat easily of 2019 for him.
Do you think part of the reason maybe that more people aren't talking about Aaron Jones is because we saw A.J. Dillon come on in the second half of last year when Jones had some injury problems?
Yeah, I think you do concern yourself with a so-called committee approach, but I think in a way it also helps Aaron Jones stay fresh here. I think you have to keep that in mind. He's going to have a big role as a receiver, and that's always going to be there. And I know A.J. Dillon surprised some people with his pass catching last year, but Jones is going to be a big part of what they do. And if you read between the lines what Aaron Rodgers is saying, he's going to lean on Jones and Dillon quite a bit because I don't think he trusts all of his receivers that he has left this season.
Last one for you, Vinny, today, and thanks for the time. It is much appreciated. Give us some of your, top wideouts, guys that you like, guys that we know. Listen, there are some guys that we all love, but some of the guys that you think could have big seasons that might be, overlooked.
Well, I really like Michael Pittman Jr., not too far from the wide receiver ones. And then, because I look at Matt Ryan, he's going to feed Michael Pittman Jr. a lot. They just have good chemistry. That's been all the reports out of Indianapolis. He's very similar to Calvin Ridley from a few years ago, that type of receiver, a big slot guy that they can throw to there or work on the outside. So I really like Michael Pittman to have a big season here. I think a couple of the sleepers that I think everyone is on that I also feel it kind of out producing where they're going to be drafted. Darnell Mooney, for sure. I think this Justin Fields offense is going to be better than people think. He's clearly the number one there. You look at Gabriel Davis. I know he's kind of the trendy pick, but he's there for a reason, and he's a big playmaker away from Stephon Diggs. They lost a lot of key targets last year, so I love him. I like Rashad Bateman, Elijah Moore. So just really that young second-year talent rising, and I tend to be an upside guy. Youth serves pretty well in fantasy football. I want to go for those type of players.
Vinny, thanks for the time again. We appreciate it. Do it again soon.
All right, thanks, guys.
Thank you. There goes Vinnie Iyer, Sporting News, fantasy football expert. So Justin Herbert, that kind of jumped out at me.